Okay, let's get started. I'll just start off by saying, we third read some bills today, and there was a lot of contention on our side of the aisle for several of these bills. Specifically, DEI was one of our biggest fights this week. When we speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our state and in this building, it becomes very frustrating for our caucus. I look around and I see the beautiful diversity on our side of the aisle, and I see a lot of homogeny on the other side of the aisle, and I can't help but think that our side of the aisle may be a little bit better about DEI and making sure that folks feel lifted up, folks feel heard, they feel included in our state, and nobody gets left behind. In addition to that, we have also passed a bill out of the House that has made it harder for folks to see their day in court if they're injured, and I don't think that does much to help Missourians. I think it does a lot more to help insurance companies. That has been a pretty big disappointment. And one other thing I'd like to mention before we take questions is I think that the House Democrats actually had a pretty big win this week. There was a bill that went through Children and Families that proposed to create a database of pregnant women in this state. And after the hearing, after Ranking Member Rachel Prouty led her team in defense of pregnant women and keeping folks out of databases and keeping government from overreaching into our medical decisions, that bill not only I don't think will ever come out of committee, but Representatives Olerking and Allen both rescinded their bills that they had filed. So I think the message was loud and clear. Missourians don't want this, and I think that was a bipartisan effort to make sure that didn't happen in this state.
Overall in the third readings today, what would you say the message from Republicans to voters was?
I think that the message to voters is we know more than you. We purport to know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is bad for this state. And that is nonsense. We know that, and I think deep down they know that. America is and always has been a melting pot. That's what makes us great. That's what makes Missouri great. That's what makes our economy great. The message is that they believe their way is right. And not only that, but they don't believe that Missourians should see their days in court. Missourians deserve the privilege of our court systems. Missourians deserve to be made whole if they've been wronged by a corporation. That's what our caucus believes.
With the police takeover legislation this might be for a St. Louis legislator, the same legislation has passed the House in different forms the last couple of years, but it's hit the roadblock of the Senate. Now Governor Mike Kehoe has put his support behind it, which is something that Parson didn't do vocally, but it still has to go through the Senate. So what concessions or things are you looking to change the bill as it goes over to the other side to get it, basically, I know you said before that there are no concessions, but it's going to change likely. What are you thinking you might see?
I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I spoke with Representative Chris, and we had several amendments that would possibly make the bill better, stating that if they did be able to pick the candidates the mayor still would choose, they were not amenable to anything. So I'm not sure. I'm hoping that our senators can kill it.
I guess another question on in addition to the board, there's also the change of the rioting definition got a lot of attention. That could be for anybody, questions on that and how you're hoping that language might change or be removed as it goes to the bill.
I believe it's a violation of the First Amendment. It's constitutionally vague, and also if we go to Mardi Gras and have a couple drinks, we can be proposed to a felony because that's public intoxication. So definitely don't like that either.
I'd like to ask Representative Ani about, the House Speaker talked about meeting next week with some Kansas City area folks, Jackson County Legislature, coming here to talk to legislative and folks, leaders, and then the governor, I think, about a plan moving forward for the stadium, Chiefs, Royals. I'm curious, the plans that have been before voters twice now have both failed. You're a marketing expert. What needs to happen the next go-around to be able to get the support of voters?
Well, one thing that I always believe is that educating the public on these issues as much as possible is key to solving our problems. And I think one challenge that the last proposed sales tax ran into was a very short time frame from when the plan was proposed to when the ask was made at the ballot box. And I think that it would behoove leaders who are really working to solve this problem for Missouri to work together in a way that really elevates the issue to voters, educates the voters on what this tax really will go to and what it means. And, I think that that's where we need to start. But I also think that the voting public needs to see cooperation from state, county, and city leaders to make sure that we have eyes on this from every aspect of government, that we have stakeholders in the community who are ready to sit down and hash this out, and that we are finally, and I think most importantly, being the absolute best stewards of taxpayer dollars as we possibly can.
Have you been invited to those meetings that are coming next week?
I have not been invited to those meetings, but I sure would love to attend.
Wednesday morning.
Thank you so much. I'll be asking follow-up questions.
Do you support the Republican leadership's attempt to stall effectively the budget process for the Missouri State Public Defenders in response to the employment of David Spears by that office, considering his violent record that he admitted to?
I'm going to throw this to Representative Fogel. She's my ranking member on budget.
So House Democrats have had a lot of conversations about this topic. Of course, what happened a few decades ago was absolutely tragic for so many people in Southwest Missouri, where I hail from. But House Democrats are equally concerned about the Public Defender's Office being able to provide the vital and constitutional services that they provide. And we do not want to live in a state where government can wrongly accuse and put someone in jail, and the Public Defender's Office isn't there to advocate for people who have not committed any crimes. We will see how those conversations go. I know Republican leadership is in continued conversations with the Public Defender's Office, and we're hopeful they can come to some level of resolution. But I know that House Democrats will stand to make sure that we have a functioning Public Defender's Office.
Is there a follow-up? I think you all recessed from that conversation with the public defender system. Is there a new one on schedule?
The public defenders will be before the budget next Wednesday, and we look forward to hosting them and talking about their fiscal year budget.
So in addition to the public safety bill, the chamber also passed the bill on pesticides as well as the class action, or not class action, but the lawsuit statute of limitations. Those bills did not have unanimous support from Republicans, and that there were no's, especially on the pesticide bill. There were also presents. What do you make it that this was not a clear, stamp move on compared to other legislation passed so far?
I would just say that it is a very complicated issue, and there are a lot of stakeholders who are pushing one way or another in this building. And I think it's pretty clear there are coalitions that were created out of this bill. However, I also think that it's noteworthy that it passed with fewer votes this year out of the House than it did last year.
2 years ago, when Representative Ritchie added the anti-DEI language to the budget, it sort of created this brief moment of chaos where agencies were scrambling to figure out what would be cut. Have you heard anything with Keough's order this week and then now this legislation from department heads about? We haven't heard specifics of what programs are going to be cut from this. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't heard anything, and I will say I think that there appears to already be a lot of confusion, especially when you take a look at what was in the executive order versus what is in the legislation that we're trying to pass through the legislature. It's not identical, and it would have different outcomes than the executive order. And so I think that there's a lot of confusion still, and I do think that it is going to be up to our departments and our entire government, frankly, to take a look at what our departments are doing, what is going to be continue to be funded, what may not continue to be funded, and what's at risk here in the state.
Do you expect the legislation to be modified possibly to mirror the executive order so there's consistency?
I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything.
Based upon what you've read in the executive order, are you concerned about anyone losing their job within state government?
I'm I'm going to let Betsy take this. Yeah.
So obviously, the executive order from the governor's office this week has budgetary ramifications for our state, and that the executive order says that the executive branch cannot utilize funds for certain things. I think, myself personally this week, since the executive order came out, have been asking a lot of questions of people much smarter than me about what this language actually means. And I think that there is some level of a concern that our state budget now utilizes and appropriates funds for programs that could be in contradiction with the executive order. And we are waiting from guidance from the executive branch to see how they will move forward with some of those. We have programs in the state budget that support programs that are specifically and can only be used by young black men. We have places in the budget for programs that can specifically and only be used by women. And when I read the plain language of the executive order, I do think there's some concerns that our appropriations process this year might look a little bit different. There's one part I will point out very quickly. This is a little in the weeds, but I think it's also interesting that the executive order specifically says under subparagraph I above, except as authorized by state or federal law. The appropriations bills are state law, so if our state budget says something and everything in state law is an exclusion, then I'm not sure what this executive order does in totality anyway. So it'll be interesting to see legal guidance come on that.
Representative Ani, the Speaker said that your bill on divorce rules will be on the floor next week. Listed several other bills that'll be on the floor that are have family theme. But when asked about the legislation that they want to put forward on abortion or Amendment 3, he said, well, that's coming. What do you think is going on, and how are you all preparing for when that legislation does show up?
Well, I'll say I am so proud that Representatives Prouty and Williams have taken the mantle on the bill that I proposed last year to ensure that women in Missouri can get divorced while pregnant. I'm really proud of the work that they've done, and I'm really hopeful it can get across the finish line this year. That said, there are several other, like you mentioned, pieces of legislation moving through that are good for families and that are good for young folks in the state, especially the child marriage ban bill and others. And, I think that we hear a lot from the other side that they are pro-life often, and bills like this are very pro-life, in my opinion. So my guess on the Amendment 3 is that they simply don't have consensus yet on their side of the aisle. I have heard from folks on the far right that it doesn't go far enough, and I've heard from folks who have deep concerns about the idea that we would require a police report to serve as evidence to a doctor that an abortion needs to take place. I think that is really poor public policy, and I'm guessing that there's a lot of consternation on their side about the actual details of the legislation that they put forth. So, I can see why a few of these other family-centric pieces of legislation are moving forward while that one is not moving as quickly.
Can you talk about the court ruling last Friday on Amendment 3? It dealt with the licensing. Is licensing good? And what's bad about the licensing requirements and the old requirements that we have for abortion clinics?
Sorry, could you restate the question?
Okay, so is licensing good, number one? And in this court case that was ruled on last Friday with abortions, with the licensing, what was wrong with the licensing requirements that were temporarily struck down at least?
Right. So Missouri has a long history of trying to restrict abortion rights in a lot of different ways statutorily. And when Amendment 3 was passed, it put into our Constitution that Missourians have the right to abortion. Except that, statutorily, the places where these procedures should be taking place have been so restricted by state statute and just chipped away at over and over and over again that they were in a place where they actually weren't able to perform those services for folks. And so is licensing good? Yes. Is burdensome requirements on healthcare providers good? Absolutely not. And I'm really glad that abortion is finally accessible in our state.
Yes. Are there any parts of the public safety bill that just passed that you guys do like?
Yeah, I'll throw it to one of my members.
Yeah, I'd say there are. Representative Mark Sharp, Public Safety Ranking Member. There are several bills that are included. It includes about roughly 20 bills in House Bill 495. It was pretty big when it came to committee, even bigger since it's left committee. So it's already gone through fiscal review, but I'll just go ahead and list a few bills that I think would have some broad support. So I'll start with my House Bill 645, which strengthens Missouri's DUI laws. Missouri is amongst some of those states that have the loosest DUI laws, and my House Bill 645 will improve that. House Bill 277 creates the offense of organized retail theft. That's been a huge issue, especially in South Kansas City and in Midtown Kansas City. So we are hopefully going to be supportive of that measure in the bill. But again, these are all bills that are buried in 495. The spirit of the bill, obviously, is to shift control of the St. Louis Police Department back to the state. But if this bill were to pass, I think there are some other provisions that are pretty helpful. Also, House Bill 225, sponsored by Chairman Myers. What this bill would do is allow the chief executive officer of any law enforcement agency to request outside support from other states. So, for example, KCPD, which already has a strong relationship with law enforcement agencies in Kansas, but those law enforcement agencies from outside states don't have the liability protections if they were to ever find themselves having to do actual work outside of directing traffic. So, for example, last year's police, the Chiefs Parade, all those Kansas sheriffs and law enforcement agency folks that were from out of state, they were helpful, but if they could not be liable for themselves or anything else that happened during that time. So that bill will tighten that up. And there's other provisions, some other ones that aren't so good. The rioting bill, that was one of them. But for the most part, if you were to remove the St. Louis PD portion, if you were to remove the portion on rioting, I think you'd find a lot of broad bipartisan support on this bill. But with those two things still in it, there's just no way.
Representative Sharp, does this energy around putting St. Louis back under state control, does that dampen any of Kansas City's efforts to bring it back under local control?
Sure doesn't help any. Sure doesn't help any. Now we have the two major cities in this country that are under state control for law enforcement are now both housed here in Missouri. And that's not something we should brag about. Kansas City has had their deadliest years under state control. Kansas City is so bad, it's nicknamed Killer City. This is not something that we should be proud of. And bringing St. Louis PD, who has made great strides, they've already increased salaries. For folks that are for officers that are 20 years and under, they've received 7% pay increases, the same thing that the Kansas City Police Department has done under state control. They've also given pay increases to folks that are 20 years over with a 2% increase. They've increased morale. They've reduced the homicides. It seems to me that Mayor Tashara Jones and Police Chief Tracy have figured something out in St. Louis, and I think that the state should let them do their job.